Greetings, one and all, to the most cursed, most cringiest corner of the internet. A YouTube channel content creator actively alienating everyone in both the analog and digital world. Well, welcome and good evening, you wonderful dice of all alignments. I am Lunar D8, your tsundere streamer who doesn't stream. We're continuing to read The Tragedy of X by Ellery Queen, Act 2, Scene 3. Weehawken Terminal, Wednesday, September 9, 11:58 p.m. The West Shore Railroad waiting room in the Weehawken Terminal was an old, drafty, two-story structure, huge as a barn out of Dingnag. The ceiling was nakedly iron-girdered, the beams crossing each other in a crazy motif. High above the floor and hugging the second-story walls ran a platform skirted by a railing. Off this platform were corridors leading to a small official chambers. Everything was drab, dusty, gray, white. The macerated corpse of conductor Charles Wood had been borne on its canvas bier, still sopping with river water, through the echoing waiting room, then upstairs along the platform to the private office of the station master. The waiting room itself had been commandeered by the New Jersey police and cleared of railroad passengers. The passengers from the south cabin of the Mohawk were escorted in a buzzing bustle through the lanes of police to the terminal waiting room, where, under guard, there waited the doubtful pleasure of Inspector Thum and District Attorney Bruno. The Mohawk itself had been chained by Thum's order to the pier. Consultation of ferry officials resulted in a rapid revision of the ferry schedule. Ferries came and went in the fog. Railroad service was permitted to continue as usual, except that a temporary ticket office was installed in the train shed itself, and passengers suffered to entrain through the ferry waiting room. The abandoned Mohawk, alive with lights, was black with detectives and police. None except officials and police were permitted to board. In the station master's office upstairs, a small group surrounded the recumbent body. District Attorney Bruno busied himself with the telephone. His first call was to the home of District Attorney Renelis of Hudson County. He explained quickly over the telephone that the dead man had been a witness in the New York murder of Harley Longstreet, over which he, Bruno, had jurisdiction, and requested permission to conduct the preliminary inquiry into Woods's death himself, despite the fact that the man had been killed in New Jersey territory. Reynolds acquiesced, and Bruno at once notified New York Police Headquarters of Inspector Thum, grasped the instrument, and ordered additional New York detectives. Mr. Drury Lane was sitting quietly in a chair, watching Bruno's lips and the now hard-lipped pallor of John DeWitt, forgotten in a corner, and the cold fury of Inspector Thum. As Thum put down the telephone, Lane said, "Mr. Bruno." The district attorney, who had moved to the foot of the corpse and was staring moodily down at its horrible length, twisted his head toward Lane. An odd hope leaped into his eyes. "Mr. Bruno," said Drury Lane, "have you examined the signature of Wood carefully?" "The signature of his identification card." "What do you mean?" "It seems to me," explained Lane mildly, "that it is of paramount importance to prove, indisputably, the identity of the anonymous letter written. Inspector Thooms seemed to think Wood's signature and the handwriting of the letter were the same, but with all deference to the inspector's opinion, I, for one, should feel more content if an expert confirmed it. Thum grinned nastily. "They're the same, Mr. Lane. Don't fret yourself about that." He knelt by Wood's body, and with no more emotion than if he had been handling a stuffed tailor's dummy, he explored the dead man's pockets. He rose at last with two wrinkled, damp pieces of paper. One was a Third Avenue Railway's accident report blank, carefully describing a minor collision with an automobile that afternoon, and signed. The other was a stamped, sealed envelope. Thum tore it open, read it, handed it to Bruno, who ran his eye down the sheet and then turned it over to Lane. It was a request for literature on a correspondence course in transportation engineering. Lane studied the handwriting and signatures of both documents. "Have you the unsigned note, Mr. Bruno?" Bruno rummaged in the depths of his wallets and produced the letter. Lane spread the three pieces on the paper on the desk to his side, scrutinized them with unwinking concentration. He smiled after a moment and returned them all to Bruno. "I apologize, Inspector," he said. "All three were undoubtedly written by the same hand, and since we know that Wood wrote the accident report and the letter to the correspondence school, he must also have been our anonymous letter writer from the identical handwritings. Nevertheless, it is important, I think, that an expert corroborate even Inspector Thum's violent opinion." Thum grunted and dropped to his knees again beside the dead man. District Attorney Bruno returned the three documents to his wallets and reached for the telephone once more. "Dr. Schilling? Doc, this is Bruno." "In the Weehawken Railroad Terminal, station master's office." "Yes, behind the ferries. Right away." "Oh, well, finish that and get here as fast as you can." 4 o'clock? Then don't bother. I'll have the body taken to the Hudson County morgue, and you can pick it up there for examination." Yes, I insist on having you in on it. It's the body of Charles Wood, the conductor of the Long Street car." "Right. Bye." "If I may make a further suggestion," put in Drury Lane from his chair, "Mr. Bruno, it is possible that Wood spoke to or was seen by the ferrymen or fellow streetcar employees just before boarding the Mohawk." "Excellent hunch, Mr. Lane. They may still be around." Bruno picked up the telephone again and put in a call to the New York side of the ferry route. "Bruno, D.A. of New York County speaking. From the Weehawken Terminal. There's been a murder here." "Oh, you've heard it." "And I want cooperation at once." "Fine. Send over any ferry employees who may have seen or spoken to Conductor Charles Wood, number 2101 3rd Avenue, Railways Line, 42nd Street, Crosstown, this evening, about an hour ago." "Yes, and while you're doing that, see if you can't pick up one of the car inspectors on duty. I'm sending over a police boat." Bruno hung up and dispatched a detective with orders to the captain of the police boat moored to the pilings by the Mohawk. "Now," he rubbed his hands, "Mr. Lane, while Inspector Thum is examining the body, would you care to go downstairs with me? There's a raft of work to be done." Lane rose. Out of the corner of his eyes, he had been watching DeWitt, crouched forlornly in a corner. "Perhaps," said Lane, in a serene baritone, "Mr. DeWitt would accompany us. The scene here cannot be anything but unpleasant to him, Mr. Bruno." Bruno's eyes gleamed behind his rimless glasses. His gaunt face curved into smiles. "Yes, by all means. Come along if you like, Mr. DeWitt." The little gray broker looked gratefully at Lane's cloaked figure. He followed the two men from the room. They skirted the platform and descended to the floor of the waiting room. The district attorney raised raised his hand in the hush that fell as they paraded across the floor. "The pilot of the ferry boat, Mohawk, this way. Want to chat with you, Captain, too." Two men detached themselves from the group of passengers and trudged to the spot. "I'm the pilot, Sam Adams." The ferry pilot was a squat, powerful man with closely cropped black hair and a bullish face. "Just a moment. Here. Where's Jonas? Jonas!" Inspector Thumb's secretarial detective hurried up. "Notebook ready. Take this testimony down. Now, Adams, we're trying to get confirmatory identifications of the dead man. Did you see the body when he had it on the ferry deck?" "Sure did. Have you ever seen the man before?" "Hundreds of times." The pilot hitched his trousers purposefully. "Sort of friend of mine he was. Course his head was bashed in and all that, but I'd swear on the book that he's Charlie Wood, conductor on the crosstown." "What makes you think so?" Pilot Adams lifted his cap and scratched his head. "Why, I just know. Same build, same red hair, same clothes. Can't tell you exactly how I know, I just know. Besides, I spoke to him tonight on the boat." "Oh, you saw him then?" "Where? In the pilot house? I thought that was against the rules. Tell me the whole story, Adams." Adams cleared his throat. He spat into a nearby spittoon, darted an embarrassed glance at the tall, cadaverous, weather-beaten man at his side, the ferry captain, and said, "Well, let's see. I know this Charlie Wood for years. Been on this run nigh on to 9 years, ain't I, Captain?" The captain nodded his head judiciously and expectorated with deadly accuracy into the cuspidor. "Charlie lives over in Weehawken here, I guess, 'cause he always took the ferry across at 10:45. When he was through with his shift on the car." "Just a moment." Bruno nodded significantly to Lane. "Did he take the 10:45 ferry tonight?" The pilot seemed aggrieved. "I'm getting to it. Sure he did. Well, anyways, years back, he got into a habit of coming up the top passenger deck and passing the time of night. You might say, ha." Bruno scowled, and Adams hastened on. "Anyways, if Charlie don't come up there and yell to me of nights, I'm sort of disappointed. Course, nights he was off or stayed over in the city, I didn't see him, but most generally he took the Mohawk." "That's very interesting," commented the district attorney. "Very, but make it snappy. Adams, this isn't a serial, you know." "Well, ain't I?" The pilot shuffled again, set himself. "Now, then, tonight Charlie comes up on the 10:45 top passenger deck, starboard, like he always does, and yells up to me, 'Ahoy there, Sam.' He says ahoy, mostly 'cause of me being a sailor, you see. Just a joke of his, ha!" Bruno showed his teeth, and Adams sobered instantly. Well, I'm getting to it," he said hastily. "So I yells back, ahoy, and I says, 'Lousy fog, ain't it, Charlie? Thick as me old lady's brogue.' I don't know what that means. I don't know what brogue means. We're gonna hop on Google for a second so I can figure out what brogue means." A strong outdoor shoe with an ornamental perforated pattern in the leather. I mean, I've seen that stuff. Rarely. It's not a very common thing. I'll be very clear, guys. I was assuming that he was talking about his old lady, his his wife's pubic hair. Her pussy hair. That's what I thought he was talking about when he said brogue. I didn't think he was talking about a fancy, thick material dress shoe with like embroidery and shit. Thought we were talking about hair that's down below. And he says, yelling up at me, I could see him most as clear as I see you. He was up right close to the pilot house, and the lights of the house was shining on his face. He says, you tell him, Sam, rotten, ain't it? And I says, how tricks with you, Charlie? And he says, well, he says, so had a collision with the Chevy this afternoon. Guinness was hopping. He says, damn fool woman driver, he says, and says, ain't they hell? And Adams grunted in shocked surprise that the sharp elbow of the ferry captain drove with force into his meaty ribs. Get the hell on with that yarn, Sam, said the captain. He had a hollow bass voice that reverberated through the room. Can't you see the lubbers are going to pop you one if you don't make them port? Pilot Adams whirled on his superior. You poke me in the ribs again. Here, here, Bruno's voice was sharp. None of that. You're the captain of the Mohawk. That's me. Boomed the tall, cadaverous man. Why are we calling him cadaverous? Cadaverific! Seriously, okay, I'm just saying, cadaver is not a word I would imagine we describe a living person with. So, in this context, what the fuck is cadaverous? Okay, that's cadaverous, cadavertastic, cadaveristic. Okay, I forgot what the word I'm trying to look up in all my fucking with you guys. Where the fuck am I in this? Where the fuck did I even read the word cadaverous? Cadaverific. Yep, cadaverous. Okay. The fuck? Cadaverous, an adjective describing a person or appearance that is deathly pale, gaunt, thin, or haggard, closely resembling a corpse. It is frequently used in literature to evoke a spooky, sickly, or intensely emaciated image, often associated with prolonged illness, hunger, or supernatural figures. Okay, so the captain of this ship needs to go to a Wendy's. Gotcha. Okay. Captain Sutter, 21 years on the river. Were you in the pilot house with this while this conversation was taking place? That's my ballywick, mister, on a foggy night. Did you see this man Wood while he was yelling up at Adams? You're tootin', mister. You sure it was 10:45? Yep. Did you see Wood again after his talk of Adams? Nope. Next I saw him, he was being fished out of the river. You're positive of the identification? I ain't finished, broke in Pilot Adams in a complaining voice. He said something else. He said he wasn't going to stay on for any extra trips tonight. Had an appointment. He did, over in Jersey. You're sure of that? Did you hear that, Captain Sutter? For once, this grubby shock, Gabby shocks. Gabby shocks, right, mister? Okay, why am I imagining Gargura at the moment? I don't know. And that was Wood. Seen him hundreds of times. You said, Adams, that he wasn't going to stay on for extra trips tonight. Was he in the habit of staying on for extra trips? Not a habit, I wouldn't say, but sometimes when he felt good, especially in the summertime, he'd take a couple of rides. That's all, both of you. The two men turned and halted at once at the commanding note in Drury Lane's voice. Bruno rubbed his jaw. "One moment, Mr. Bruno," said Lane pleasantly. "May I ask these men a question?" "Certainly. Anything and any time you want to." Mr. Lane: "Thank you, Mr. Adams." Captain Sutter. The two rivermen were staring at him open-mouthed. The cape, the black hat, the formidable shtick. "Did either of you see Wood leave that portion of the upper deck where he had been standing when he spoke to you?" "Sure, I did," said Adams promptly. "Got the signal. Began pulling her out. Wood waved his hand at us and left, going back under the roof of the top passenger deck." "Right," thundered Captain Sutter. "Exactly how much of the upper deck is visible to you gentlemen from the pilot-house at night, even when your lights are on?" Captain Sutter speared the spittoon again. "Not much. We can't see under the roof of the passenger's deck and atoll. And at night, with the fog, anything that's outside to the reflection other than pilot-house light is dark as Davy's locker. Pilot's house built like a fan, you know." "You saw and heard nothing else from 10:45 until 11:40? That might betray the presence of human beings on the upper deck." "Say, listen," growled the captain. "Ever tried to take a tub across the river on a foggy night? Believe me, mister, you got all you can do to keep out of the way of the river traffic." "Excellent." Drury Lane stepped back. Bruno, brows knit, dismissed the rivermen with a nod. He climbed to the seat of one of the waiting-room benches, shouting, "Now I want all of those who saw the body fall from the upper deck to step up here." 6 people wavered, looked at each other, then with hesitant steps crossed the room to stand uncomfortably beneath Bruno's unfriendly scrutiny. All, as if rehearsed, began to speak at once. One at a time, snapped Bruno, jumping off the bench. He eyed a rotund little man with blond hair and a paunch. "You, what's your name?" "August Havemeyer, sir," said the little man nervously. He wore a round, clerical-looking hat, a stringy black tie. His clothes were shabby and begrimed. "I'm a printer going home from work." "Printer going home from work?" Bruno rocked on his heels. "All right, Havemeyer. Did you see a man's body fall from the upper deck as the ferry docked?" "Yes, sir, yes, sir." "Where were you at the time?" "I was sitting in that room on the ferry, the cabin, and I was sitting on the bench across from the window," said the German, licking his fat lips, "just as the boat began to get into the piers between those big sticks." "The pilings?" "Yes, the pilings. Just then I saw something big and black. It looked like I sort of got a look at a face, but it was all blurry, falling outside the windows, opposite from upstairs, somewheres. It crunched right away." Havemeyer wiped a bead of perspiration from his trembling upper lip. "It happened so sudden." "And that's all you saw?" "Yes, sir. I began to yell, 'Man overboard,' and it seems like the other people saw it too, because everybody began to yell." "That's all for you, Havemeyer." The little man retreated in relief. "Now, folks, did everybody see the same thing?" There was a chorus of assent. "Anybody see anything else? Maybe get a look at the face as it fell past." No answer. They looked at each other doubtfully. "Very well, Jonas, take their names, occupations, and addresses." The detective stepped into the midst of the group and interrogated the 6 remaining passengers with bored rapidity. Havemeyer spoke first, furnished his address, and scuttled back into the main body of the crowd. The second was a dirty little Italian, dressed in a black shining material, wearing a black official cap, Giuseppe Salvatore, ferry boot black. He had been shining a man's shoes facing the windows. He said the third was a worn, bedraggled little old Irish woman, Miss Martha Wilson, returning, she said, from her work as a scrub woman in Times Square office building. She had been seated next to Havemeyer and had seen exactly the same thing. The fourth was a large, dapper man, Henry Nixon, dressed in a shrieking checked suit. He was an itinerant salesman of cheap jewelry, he said, and had been strolling forward through the cabin when the body hurtled past the window. The last 2 were young girls, May Cohen and Ruth Tobias. Tobias Tobuscus, office workers returning to their New Jersey homes. Safety torch. From the Broadway, where they had, they said, seen a swell show. They had just risen from their seats near Havemere and Mrs. Wilson when the body fell. None of the 6 passengers Bruno discovered had seen a man in conductor's uniform. A man, furthermore, of red hair during the trip. All clamorously claimed that they had taken the 11:30 boat from the New York side. All denied having visited the upper deck. Mrs. Wilson testifying that she never did. The trip was too short, and besides, she said, the weather was that nasty. Bruno had the 6 remaining passengers herded back to the main body of passengers across the room, following them to conduct a short examination of the others. He discovered nothing. No passenger had seen a conductor with red hair. No passenger had visited the top deck. All professed to have been on the boat for one trip only, having embarked at 11:30 from New York. When Bruno Lane and DeWitt marched upstairs again to the station master's office, they found Inspector Flume flanked by his men. Shouldn't be that hard to figure out where I am. Sitting in a chair and staring viciously down at the torn clay that had been Charles Wood. Thum leaped to his feet as they came in, glared at DeWitt, opened his mouth to speak, clamped it shut again, and began to prowl up and down before the outstretched corpse, hands clasped fiercely behind his back. Bruno, he said in a small voice, I'd like to talk to you privately. The district attorney's nostrils quivered. He stepped to Thum's side, and the 2 men conversed in whispers. Occasionally, Bruno glanced up to search DeWitt's face. In the end, he nodded emphatically and strolled off to lean against the desk. Thum clumped his feet solidly on the floor, screwed his ugly visage terrifyingly, and attacked DeWitt. DeWitt, when did you get aboard the Mohawk tonight? What ferry did you take? DeWitt drew himself up to his meager height. The hairs of his stiff mustache bristled. Before I answer, Inspector Thum, will you please tell me what right you have to question my movements? Please don't make it too difficult for us, Mr. DeWitt, said the district attorney in an odd tone. DeWitt blinked. His eyes struggled to the face of Drury Lane, but the actor exhibited no sign of encouragement or disapprobation. Shrugging, DeWitt faced Thum again. Very well, I took the 11:30 boat. The 11:30, and how did it happen that you were returning home so late? I spent the evening at my club, the Exchange Club, downtown. I told you as much before. Then we met on the ferry. So you did. Thum jammed a cigarette into his mouth. Were you on the upper passenger deck of the Mohawk during any part of the 10-minute ride across the river? DeWitt bit his lip. Suspicious again, Inspector. No. Did you see Conductor Charles Wood during the trip? No. If you had seen him, would you have recognized him? I think so. I've seen him on the crosstown many times. Besides, the Longstreet investigation fixed him in my mind. But I assure you that I didn't see him tonight. Thum produced a paper packet of matches, ripped one away, struck it, and lit his cigarette most carefully. In all the times you've seen Wood on his car, did you ever speak to him, my dear Inspector? DeWitt seemed amused. Yes or no? Of course not. So you knew him by sight, had never spoken to him, and didn't see him tonight. All right, DeWitt. Now, when I stepped on the ferry not long ago, you were just leaving. You certainly knew an accident had occurred. Weren't you curious enough to stay and find out what had happened? The smile had faded from DeWitt's lips. His face was tight and heckled. No, I was tired, anxious to get home. Tired and anxious to get home, said Thum exasperatingly. A good reason, by God. DeWitt, do you smoke? DeWitt stared. Smoke, he repeated angrily. He turned to the district attorney. Mr. Bruno, he cried, this is infantile. Am I to submit to such a nonsensical inquisition? Bruno said in a cold voice, please answer the question. Again, DeWitt glanced at Drury Lane. Again, DeWitt looked about helplessly. Yes, he said slowly. Something terrified had crawled under his tired eyelids. Yes. Cigarettes? No. Cigars. Have you any with you? Silently, DeWitt reached into the breast pocket of his coat, produced a rich leather cigar case, neatly initialed in gold, and handed it to the inspector. Thum pulled the top away, and taking out one of the 3 cigars in the case, examined it minutely. Or minutely. I think it's minutely. On the cigar was a gilt band lettered J.O. Dew. Private brand, DeWitt? Yes, they're made up specially for me by Huangas of Havana. The bands, too? Of course. Huangas puts the bands on, insisted Thum. Oh, piffle, said DeWitt distinctly. What is the purpose of this inane questioning? There's something deep, dark, and foolish in your mind, Inspector. Yes, Huangas puts the bands on the cigars, boxes them, ships them to my boat, and so on and so on. May I ask what of it? Without replying, Inspector Thum restored the cigar to its case and stowed it away in one of his bottomless pockets. DeWitt's face clouded at this wanton appropriation, but straightening his little body defiantly, he said nothing. One question more, DeWitt, resumed the inspector in the most amiable way in the world. Have you ever offered Conductor Wood one of these cigars on the streetcar or anywhere else? I see, said DeWitt in a deliberate voice. I see now. No one spoke. Thum, whose cigarettes, drooping from his lips, had gone out, was watching the broker with tigerish eyes. I am finally, went on DeWitt with restraint, finally checkmated. Inspector, you play a clever game. No, I have never offered Conductor Wood one of these cigars on the streetcar or anywhere else. Why does this remind me of green eggs and ham? That's fine, DeWitt, just dandy, chortled Thum, because I've found one of your special brand initial banded cigars in the vest pocket of the dead man. DeWitt nodded bitterly, as if he had quite foreseen this statement. He opened his mouth, closed it again, opened it, and said in a dreary way, I gather, then, I'm to be arrested for the murder of this man. Then he laughed, an old man's broken, embarrassing cackle. I'm not dreaming, I suppose. One of my cigars and the murdered man. He sank into a nearby chair. Bruno said formally, No one has suggested arrest, Mr. DeWitt. At this moment, a party of men appeared at the door, led by a man in a police captain's uniform. Bruno stopped speaking and questioned the officer with his eyes. The officer nodded and went away. Come in, boys, said Thum in an agreeable voice. The newcomers trooped into the room shyly. One was the Irish motorman Patrick Guinness, who had driven the streetcar in which Longstreet had been murdered. The second was a lean old man attired shabbily and wearing a visored cap, who said he was Peter Hicks, ferryman on the New York side. The third was a wind-burned streetcar inspector whose station, he said, was at the end of the crosstown run, just outside the ferry terminal, at the foot of the 42nd Street. Behind them appeared several detectives, among them Lieutenant Peabody. Sergeant Duffy's broad shoulders loomed behind Peabody, all eyes focused instinctively on the dead body lying on the canvas. Guinness glanced once at Wood's remains, swallowed convulsively, and turned away with frightened eyes. He looked sick. Guinness, will you formally identify this man? Asked Bruno. Guinness mumbled, Christ, look at his head. It's Charlie Wood, all right. You sure? Guinness directed a shaking finger to the left leg of the corpse. The trousers had been ripped and torn by the concussion with the side of the ferry and the pilings. The left leg, except for the shoe and the shock, was nakedly exposed. Part of a long scar was visible on the calf, disappearing where the black sock covered it. The scar curled and twisted, a peculiar cicatrix? I don't know that word. Now livid in death. That scar, said Guinness hoarsely. I've seen it many a time. Charlie showed it to me when he first came on the car line. Even before we both got transferred to the crosstown, he'd got it in an accident years and years ago, he told me. Thum stripped the sock away from the scar, revealing it in its gruesome entirety. It extended from a point immediately above the ankle to just below the knee, curving halfway around the calf. "You're positive that that's the same scar you saw?" asked Thum. "That's the scar, all right," said Guinness faintly. "Okay, Guinness," Thum rose, brushing his knees. "Now, Hicks, got anything to offer about Wood's movements tonight?" The wiry old ferryman nodded. "Sure thing, Cap. I knew Charlie pretty well. Used the ferry near every night, generally stopped and spoke to me. Tonight, around 10:30, Charlie comes into the ferry terminal, and as usual, we got to talking. Looked a little nervous. Now I come to think of it, we just gabbled a spell." "You sure of the time? 10:30? Sure, I'm sure. I got to keep tabs on the time. Them ferries run on schedule, Cap." "What did you talk about?" "Well," said Hicks, smacking his leathery lips, "we talked, and he was carrying his bag, and I asked him if he had been in town the night before, as per usual. You see, sometimes he stayed over in the city and took some clean duds with him, but no, he says it was just a second-hand bag, and he bought on his off time today, handle of the old one he'd broke." "And what kind of bag was it?" demanded Thum. "What kind of bag?" Hicks pursed his lips. "Hanged if there was anything special about it, Captain. Just one of these cheap black handbags you can buy for $1 anywhere. Square, kind of." Thum motioned to Lieutenant Peabody. "See if any of the passengers in the waiting room downstairs have bags like that one," Hicks described, "and get a search started for the Mohawk for a bag of that description. Upper deck, pilot house, and all, top to bottom. Then have the boys on the police boat search the water. Might have been thrown overboard, or maybe it fell overboard. If it's in the water, I don't think you'd ever find it." Peabody strolled out. Thum turned again to Hicks. Before he could speak, Drury Lane said gently, "I beg your pardon, Inspector. Hicks, by any chance was Wood smoking a cigar while you chatted?" Hicks' eyes widened at this apparitional inquisitor, but he replied readily enough, "Sure was. Matter of fact, I asked Charlie for one. Them cremos he smoked sorta appealed to me. Anyway, he looks for one in his pockets. His vest pocket, too, I trust, Hicks," said Lane. "Yep, vest pockets and all, and he says, 'Nope, guess I'm all out, Pete. I'm smoking my last one.'" "Smart question at that, Mr. Lane," said Thum grudgingly. "You're certain it was a cremo, Hicks, and he hadn't another any kind on him?" Hicks said in a plaintive tones, "But I've just told this gentleman, Cap." DeWitt did not look up. He sat in his chair as if turned to stone. From his eyes it was doubtful whether he had even heard the exchange of questions and answers. They were brimming and bloodshot. "Guinness," said Thum, "was Wood carrying this handbag when he completed his run tonight?" "Yes, sir," replied Guinness in a faint voice. "Just as Hicks said, he went off duty at 10:30. For the night he had had the bag stowed on the car all afternoon." "Know where Wood lived? In a rooming house in Weehawken here, 2075 Boulevard. Any relatives?" "I don't think so. Leastways, he wasn't married, and as far as I can remember, he never said a word about kin. There's another thing, Captain." Put in Hicks, the ferryman. "While Charlie and me were talking, all of a sudden, Charlie points to a little geezer that gets out of a cab, all bottled up, sneaks into the ticket office, buys a ferry ticket, and dropping the ticket into the box, crosses into the waiting room, and waits for the ferry like he didn't want anyone to see him. Charlie says to me, confidential, that the little guy was the broker John DeWitt, the feller mixed up with the murder on Charlie's car." "What?" roared Thum. "And you say this is around 10:30? He glared down at DeWitt, who had roused now, and was sitting forward, hands gripping the arms of the chair. "Go on, Hicks, go on." "Well," drawled Hicks maddeningly, "Charlie looked kind of nervous when he sees this DeWitt." "Did DeWitt see Wood?" "Reckon not. He's stuck in a corner all the time, all by himself. Anything else?" "Well, I had to go about my duties just as the ferry boat came in at 10:40. I did see this DeWitt go in through the gate, and Charlie says goodbye and goes in too. You're positive about the time now? It was the ferry leaving at 10:45. Ah, rats, said Hicks in deep disgust. I said that most 100 times. Step aside, Hicks, Thum pushed by the ferryman, and glowered down upon the broker, who was nervously picking at the fabric of his coat. DeWitt, look at me. DeWitt raised his head slowly, the misery in his eyes startled even the inspector. Hicks, is this the man Wood pointed out to you? Hicks stretched his attenuated neck, studying DeWitt's face judiciously with fish eyes. Yep, he said finally. Yep, that's the little guy. Ready to take my oath, Cap. Good enough, Hicks. Guinness and this man here. Car inspector? Won't need you now. Go downstairs and wait for me. The three men left the room with reluctant steps. Drury Lane unexpectedly sat down, leaning on his stick, surveying the taut features of the broker with melancholy eyes. Far, far in the crystal depths of those eyes there was a faint puzzlement, a suspension of judgment, a question. Now then, Mr. John O. DeWitt, growled Thumb, looming over the little man, suppose you explain to us how it is you were seen boarding the 10:45 ferry, and yet a while ago you said you took the 11:30 ferry. Bruno stirred slightly. His face was grave. Before you answer, Mr. DeWitt, it is my duty to warn you that anything you may say may be used against you. There is a stenographer here taking down every word. You needn't answer if you don't want to. DeWitt swallowed hard, ran his thin finger under his collar, made a sorry attempt to smile. The sad consequences, he murmured, rearing his body, of flirting with the truth. Yes, gentlemen, I did lie. I took the 10:45 boat. Got that, Jonas? Shouted Thum. Why'd you lie, DeWitt? That, said DeWitt quietly, I must refuse to explain. I had an appointment with someone on the 10:45 boat, but that matter was strictly personal and had nothing to do with this ghastly business. Well, if you had an appointment to meet someone on the 10:45 boat, why the hell did you stay on until 11:40? Please, said DeWitt. Moderate your language, Inspector. I am not accustomed to being addressed in this manner, and if you persist, I shall absolutely refuse to say another word. Thum swallowed a curse, caught a quick glance from Bruno, inhaled deeply, and continued in a less belligerent tone. All right, why? That's better, said DeWitt. Because the person I was waiting for did not show up at the appointed time. I remained on the boat for 4 trips, suspecting a delay. At 11:40 I gave up and decided to go home. Thum snickered. You expect us to believe that? Who was this person you were waiting for? I'm sorry. Bruno wagged his finger at DeWitt. You understand, Mr. DeWitt, you are placing yourself in a most peculiar position. You must realize that your story is very, very thin. Under the circumstances, we can't accept it without specific information. DeWitt pressed his lips together, folded his puny arms across his chest, and stared at the wall. Well, said the inspector argumentatively, maybe you'll tell us how the appointment was made. Any record of it? Letter, witness to a conversation? The appointment was made over the telephone this morning. You mean Wednesday morning? Yes. Your party called you? Yes. At my office in Wall Street. My operators keep no record of incoming calls. You knew the person who called you? DeWitt remained silent. And you say, pursued Thum, that the only reason you attempted to sneak off the boat was because you were tired of waiting and decided to go back to West Inglewood. I suppose, muttered DeWitt, that I can't expect you to believe that. The veins on Thum's neck swelled. Damned right you can't. He grasped Bruno's arm roughly and marched him to a corner. The two men conferred in heated whispers. Mr. Drury Lane sighed and closed his eyes. At this moment, Lieutenant Peabody returned from the waiting room with 6 people in tow. Detectives hurried into the station master's office, carrying cheap black handbags, 5 in number. Thum said quickly to Peabody, Well, what's doing? Here are some handbags like the ones you asked me to look for, and, grinned Peabody, their anxious owners. Anything on the Mohawk itself, no sign of a bag, Chief, and the police boat boys haven't had any luck on the river so far, either. Guess say either or either. Thum went to the door and roared, Hicks, Guinness, come on up here. The ferryman and the motorman ran upstairs and into the room, looking frightened. Hicks, take a look at these bags. Any one of 'em would. Hicks surveyed the luggage on the floor critically. Well, might all be, I reckon. Can't say exactly. What do you say, Guinness? It's hard to tell. They're all pretty much the same, Inspector. All right, beat it. The two men left. Thum squatted in his hard hams and opened one of the bags. Mrs. Martha Wilson, the old scrubwoman, uttered an outraged little gasp and began to sniffle. Thum pulled out a bundle of soiled working clothes, a lunchbox, and a paper-backed novel. Disgusted, he tackled the next bag. Henry Nixon, the salesman, began an angry protest. Thum silenced him with a devastating look and ripped open the bag. It contained several cardboard wool-topped trays covered with cheap jewelry and trinkets, and a pad of order blanks with the man's name imprinted. Thum threw the bag aside and went to the next one. It revealed a pair of dirty old trousers and some tools. Thum looked up and saw Sam Adams, the pilot of the Mohawk, regarding him anxiously. Yours? Yes, sir. The inspector opened the other two bags. One belonging to the huge Negro dock worker, Elias Jones, contained a change of clothing and a lunchbox. The second, 3 baby diapers, a half-filled nursing bottle, a cheap book, a packet of safety pins, and a little blanket. They belonged to a young couple, Mr. and Mrs. Thomas Corcoran? The man held a sleepy, surly infant in his arms. Thum growled, and the baby, after one fascinated stare, squirmed in its father's arms, buried its tiny head on his shoulder, and began to howl. Its shrill screeching filled the office. One of the detectives tittered. Thum grinned impatiently and released the 6 passengers and their luggage. Drury Lane observed with amusement that someone had hurriedly thrown a few empty sacks over the dead man. The inspector sent word by one of his men to release Motorman Guinness, the streetcar inspector, and Peter Hicks, ferryman. A policeman came in and rumbled something to Lieutenant Peabody. Peabody groaned, A lot of nothing on the river, Chief. Well, I guess Wood's bag was thrown overboard and sank. Probably never will be found, muttered Thum. Sergeant Duffy clumped upstairs, puffing. A sheaf of scribbled papers was clutched in his red fist. Names and addresses of all those people downstairs, Inspector. Bruno hurried over and scanned the list of the ferry occupants over Thum's shoulder. Both he and Thum seemed to be looking for something. They went from sheet to sheet, searching. Then they all exchanged congratulatory glances, and the district attorney's lips set hard. Mr. DeWitt, he snapped, you might be interested to learn that all of the people who were in the streetcar when Longstreet was done in, only you were present on the ferry tonight. DeWitt blinked, looked blankly into Bruno's face, and then, with a little shiver, lowered his head. What you say, Mr. Bruno? Came Drury Lane's cool voice in the silence. May be true, but I dare say you will never be able to prove it. How? What? Stormed Thum. Bruno frowned. My dear Inspector, murmured Lane, surely you must have noticed that a number of the passengers left the Mohawk as you and I approached to board it after the hue and cry had been raised. Have you accounted for these? Thum blew out his upper lip. Well, we can hunt for 'em, can't we? He blustered, and check up that way. Drury Lane smiled. Will you ever be so positive, Inspector, as to be able to make out a legal case? How you will ever know that you have found all of them? Bruno whispered to Thum again. DeWitt peered at Drury. Lane with pitiful gratitude. Thum shook his heavy frame, barked an order to Sergeant Duffy, and the sergeant left. Thum crooked his finger at DeWitt. Come downstairs with me. The broker rose in silence and preceded the inspector out of the door. 3 minutes later they returned. DeWitt maintained his silence, and Thum seemed disgruntled. Nothing doing, he whispered to Bruno. Not one of the passengers remembers DeWitt's movements long enough to pin anything on him. One man seemed to remember him all by himself in a corner for a minute, but DeWitt says he kept himself pretty much out of sight anyway because of this phony appointment of his, hell and damnation. But that's the point in our favor, Thum, said Bruno. He has no alibi for the period in which Wood's body was being overthrown off the top of the deck. I'd a damn sight rather some passenger testified he saw DeWitt coming down those stairs. What'll we do with him? Bruno shook his head. Let's go easy tonight. He's not small pumpkins, and we want to be dead sure before we take action. Put a couple of men on him, though at that he can't very well skip out. You're the boss. The inspector strode over to DeWitt, glared down into his eyes. That's all for tonight, DeWitt. Go on home, but keep in touch with the DA. Without a word, John DeWitt rose, smoothed his coat mechanically, adjusted his felt hat on his gray head, looked around, sighed, and trudged out of the station master's office. Thum signaled at once with a splayed forefinger, and 2 detectives hurried after the broker. Bruno put on his topcoat. The office buzzed with the conversation of smoking men. Thum straddled the dead man, bent over, and lifted the sacking away from the smashed skull. You damned fool, he muttered. You might at least have named this guy X, who killed Longstreet, in that crazy letter of yours. You might as well. Bruno walked across the room and put his hand on Thum's bulging bicep. Come on there, Thum. You'll go screwy. Was that upper deck photographed? The boys are doing it now. Well, Duffy, as the sergeant panted into the room. Duffy shook his ponderous head. Not a sign of those escaped passengers. Chief couldn't even find out how many there were. Nobody said anything for a long moment. Well, blast this whole lousy case, yelled Thum into the humming silence. He whirled on himself like a furious dog chasing his own tail. I'm going over to Woods' rooming house with some of the boys. Bruno, going home? I may as well. I hope Schilling doesn't miss up on that post-mortem. I'll go back with Lane. He turned around, putting on his hat, and looked for the place where Lane had been sitting. Astonishment spread all over his face. Mr. Drury Lane had disappeared. Well, thanks for joining me, guys. See you in the next video. Bye.